When Sonic Adventure 2 was released on the Dreamcast, the press reviewed it as a bittersweet finale and a fitting send-off to Sega's console legacy. But when that very same game was ported to the GameCube just 6 months later, that was the exact moment that the whole narrative around Sonic started to be twisted. It was like the second that Sonic was no longer on a Sega console, everyone decided all at once that it was fair game to be far, far more critical, and it would only get worse from there. The reviewers being down on SA2 didn't really shock me, considering I had just fought for the love it side of the love it or hate it SA2 debate that raged through the summer of 2001. They weren't saying anything I hadn't seen before, but the original Sonic Adventure? That was a game I had always considered to be one of those generation-defining masterpieces, up there with The Legend of Zelda or Super Mario 64. When Sonic Adventure got ported to the GameCube too, this is what they said about it. I understand it better now, but I didn't have the perspective to deal with this at the time. It felt like living through revisionist history. Critics seemed to lose faith in the series a long time before most fans ever did. Looking back though, I think a lot of us probably dug our heels in a little too much against what we perceived as a wave of unfair and overblown derision directed at our favorite series. Defensive as they got, fans started holding each upcoming game to this impossible standard. This is gonna be it. This is the game that's finally going to solve all of Sonic's burgeoning issues, get the series back on track, and most importantly, shut up all those ridiculous critics. But it seemed like the higher our hopes, the more it burned when the game came out and, well, wound up doing just the opposite. And every time we got burned, more and more people lost faith in the series. The 2000s was unequivocally the worst time to be a Sonic fan on the internet. His reputation was at an all-time low. He was the definitive image of a fallen icon. The series had few defenders and fewer believers. And I'm not saying this stuff isn't still bad in some places, you can still find this, but back then TV Tropes had a page about game franchises that struggled to make the jump to 3D, and it was called Sonic Syndrome. By the latter half of the decade, even in dedicated fandom spaces, you pretty much couldn't say anything positive about any of the 3D games without someone jumping down your throat, accusing people like you as being the reason that Sega kept, and I quote, getting away with it. I would know. And that's where we were when Sonic and the Black Knight was announced. The first thing anyone knew about it was that they were giving Sonic a sword, and for a lot of people, that was all they needed to know. This coming mere weeks after Sega announced a different game where Sonic was going to be turning into some sort of stretchy-armed werewolf. It was like they were just giving the series' worst critics even more ammunition. This set of circumstances, the werewolf, the sword game, and the way fans kept being so hopeful and so defensive only to be let down for years on end, birthed the most unfortunately enduring Sonic meme there ever was. The Sonic Cycle. I want to be clear, this wasn't the fans saying this. This wasn't us. This was mocking us. It broke through to mainstream gaming discourse. It still is reflexively sided with every release. It defined the way Sonic was discussed and the way Sonic fans were discussed for years to come. From the day Black Knight was revealed, critics celebrated it as yet another hilarious disaster to mock, and fans resented it for existing. A lot of them resented it so much that they pretty much swore off ever actually buying it, especially when those reviews came out and were, exactly what we were afraid of. As for me, I think I was past the point of being angry about Sonic games by then. The series had been a bundle of contradictions for what seemed like eons, with a lot of highs and a lot of lows, so I just saw myself as going along for the ride, hoping for the best. But that perspective got a whole lot easier when that ridiculous werewolf game came out, and I scrounged together $50 and took a chance on it, and against all odds, it was actually really good. At least that's what a lot of the fans said. The critics? Well, for them it was just another Sonic game. But that dichotomy in reactions did not hold true for Black Knight. On the contrary, the few fans I knew who had actually bought it seemed to back up what the reviews had said. It was as bad as they said it was. Secret Rings had earned a lot of goodwill 2 years earlier, but I remember hearing its sequel was a major step down, trading a more focused, traditional, fun Sonic game for something more convoluted and complicated. So, in spite of how much I had enjoyed Secret Rings, it was an easy decision to skip the sequel. Although maybe it wasn't really a decision at all. I was broke. I had just dropped out of college for the second time, and I had plenty to do with all that newfound free time. I mean, Unleashed was still keeping me busy and Dragon Road wasn't gonna replay itself. I was really in one of the worst ruts of my life. In 2009, Sonic and the Black Knight was a punchline that fans wished could be a footnote. Even in the best case scenario, I think it was viewed with the same utter disinterest that Sonic mobile games usually are now. Like, I guess this is targeting somebody, but it sure ain't us. And it actually wasn't us. Sonic and the Black Knight was not meant for the distraught teens and 20-somethings that made up the internet fandom, and it wasn't meant for the disinterested game critics who were thirsty for more mockable Sonic games to dump on. It was, like most Sonic games, meant first and foremost for kids. Mike Hayes, who was the president and CEO of Sega Europe and Sega of America at the time, said as much. Sonic's core target audience very much is in that under 12 group. Sega said as much criticism as there was online. Focus group testing showed children actually really dug the stretchy-armed werewolf and the sword-swinging hedgehog. The way people reacted to this news was entirely predictable. Fans of a certain stripe tend to find it pretty off-putting to be told that basically they're too old for their opinions to matter that much anymore. But time has perhaps proven Hayes' point. Because one day, a couple of years ago, someone sheepishly left me a comment telling me that they had actually really liked Black Knight when they were growing up. They didn't know Sonic's reputation was in the toilet, or how toxic and tribalistic the fandom had become. They, and oh how I envy them, did not know about the Sonic cycle. Their parents just brought home a new Sonic game one day after school. They went into it with no expectations and an open mind, and while they can see now why some people might not have liked it, they still have a lot of affection for it. Maybe this is the best perspective to have when going into a new Sonic game. Try to turn off that analytical adult part of your brain, let go of your preconceived notions, and try to be as open-minded, full-hearted, and earnest as you would have been when you were a kid. It's not an ideal I can actually achieve again. I'm not 8 years old anymore. But it's something I'd like to reach for anyway. Because all these years later, as I write these words, I have still never played even a second of this game. Let's see what I've been putting off. This is the story of my first ever playthrough of Sonic and the Black Knight. The story begins where all Sonic stories do. Sonic and Tails are on the tornado, investigating mysterious, Alright, this is different. On a dull, overcast day, a woman in high heels is cosplaying as a force from off of Phantasy Star Online, fleeing from the titular Black Knight. She is Merlina, the royal sorceress of Camelot, and Merlin's granddaughter. And this is the Black Knight, King Arthur, who's been corrupted by the power of Excalibur's scabbard. I know the backstory because I read the manual. I'm a good boy. Arthur uses his sword to summon a gang of off-brand Heartless, and Merlina's caught between a rock and a hard place. They must be competing in turn-based combat, though. He used his turn to summon baddies, and she's gonna cast Summon Magic too, calling on a brave knight, swift as the wind. And then this happens. I cracked such a big smile here. I love how the opening sets up this big, serious, epic confrontation, and then completely subverts it with humor the second Sonic comes tumbling out of the sky. Seeing this back-to-back with Secret Rings, I can actually feel the difference those 2 years made. When Sonic Adventure came out, the Blue Blur's Western influences were pretty much dropped. But pretty much immediately after 06, Sonic started getting quippier, the stories didn't lean into melodrama so hard, and other elements of the old Western canon started showing up, and chili dogs are just the tip of the iceberg. Sonic is immediately more cavalier, more braggadocious, and more devil-may-care than he'd been in ages.
Oh, I get it. No problem. I'm used to stuff like this.
He's so dumb and he's so cool and I love him so much! I swear, There are still a few questionable deliveries here and there, but on a lot of these lines, Sonic's voice sounds so much better that if you told me he'd just gotten a brand new voice actor, I'd probably believe it.
If we don't return in time, Elise will die on board Eggman's battleship. The rules seem a little different this time around. Swords, eh? Well, if that's how you guys roll around here, why not?
It helps that the whole pipeline for video game dubbing in the US had improved by leaps and bounds by the late aughts. Games in general sounded better than they had just a few years earlier, but credit also has to go to the actor himself. Jason Griffith stated in an interview that he took voice training to improve his performance, and his effort really pays off here. His Sonic is a little deeper, a little more mature, and noticeably closer to Jason's real voice.
I'm Sonic! Sonic the Hedgehog!
He's not doing that thing where every line has the exact same cadence anymore. He's still a charming, cheesy, over-the-top character, but he sounds way more natural about it. What Sonic doesn't know is that King Arthur's power makes him immortal, and this is one of those oh-so-fortunate situations where being immortal also makes you invincible. So Merlina stops him from rushing into a battle he can't win, and teleports them both to safety. And I guess just like Secret Rings, this one's also gonna incorporate XPs of Sonic's extended cast into roles within the story. Arthur's knights are Knuckles, Blaze, and Nah, seriously, I'm not exactly brimming with excitement, but I am intrigued by the implications. And putting up with Shadow is definitely worth having Blaze. While the opening scene is fully animated CG, it looks like the majority of the rest of them are going to be more similar to Secret Rings. That being the case, I'm happy to see these are a huge step up in production quality. They're more animated for one thing. And rather than the comic on burnt parchment style of Secret Rings, these take on a painterly, almost watercolor look, making use of deep shadows for contrast. Oh, okay, I guess I do want Shadow after all. Where Secret Rings started by making you slowly meander through literally 15 minutes of a heavy-handed tutorial, Black Knight makes a much better first impression. Although I guess it'd be awfully hard to make a worse one. Either way, we start off in Misty Lake, and while it's not making the visual impression that Secret Ring stages did, I'm gonna assume this is the tutorial level. It's not meant to blow the team's creativity just yet, and things will get better from here. Where the first game used the sideways Wiimote, you play this one with the Wiimote and Nunchuck. While this was definitely a basic necessity of the gameplay, if Sonic's gonna use a sword, you need to relegate movement to the Nunchuck, I think it was also a savvy one. The Wii Remote wasn't brand new anymore, and designing a whole 3D action game around it would have been unnecessarily limiting yourself. Nobody would make that mistake. It's just a shame it wasn't enough. The fact is, the whole context around motion controls was completely different in 2009 than it was in 2007. A lot of the same factors that allowed Secret Rings to get such a positive reception, namely the novelty of motion controls and proximity to 06, were incredibly detrimental just 2 years later. People were burnt out on quote-unquote gimmicks, both as a means of input and as accoutrements that distracted from Sonic's core gameplay. But I like motion controls. Not in every circumstance and not in every implementation, but I think the wholesale rejection of them by the hardcore gamers meant the generation's sense have missed out on all the potential they had. So I want you to keep that in mind when I say, these controls aren't clicking with me, at least not yet. Despite the analog stick, basic movement feels way more like Secret Rings than I was expecting it to. You don't actually have full 3D control, you can't like turn around. Sonic is still 100% on rails. You just control his movement along the rail, moving him forward, backward, and side to side. There have been some much needed refinements though. Most notably, backstep takes you much higher and further, and mid-air movement is actually controllable now, which means moving backwards isn't going to be nearly as painful this time. The sword combat though, that's making a real weird first impression. And given that this is the mechanic the entire gameplay style is going to be built around, it's not exactly inspiring a lot of confidence. Something about it just ain't feeling right. But first impressions aren't everything, so I think I'm going to give it a little more time to try to click before I extrapolate on why. I feel like I'm missing something.
Use a combo swing!
See, like I almost kinda did something cool there, but I have no idea how or why. Is it timing? Is it related to the way I move the Wii Remote? I have no idea, but I'll keep trying. Before moving on from Misty Lake, I fought not one, but two bosses. The first was the titular Mist Dragon, and again, Nice visual presentation, but the gameplay was a letdown. This thing didn't even put up a fight. An early boss encounter should be one that makes the player feel like they're overcoming something epic, makes them feel like they're awesome at the game, while actually being fairly easy to take down as long as you've got a basic handle on how the game works. But this guy just waggles his head around and slams his chin into the ground every 30 seconds.
Well, Merlina, how was that? Did you see my real power?
That was amazing. Defeating the Mist Dragon like it was nothing.
No, see, but it was nothing. The second fight was, surprisingly, against King Arthur himself. Yeah, that was quick. This one was a little more interesting, even if we are still firmly in the tutorial zone. You have to chase him down, then play a little quick time event minigame to deal damage. It's alright. But you know what's way past being merely alright? Up to this point, Sonic has just been proving himself with a training sword. But by standing his ground against King Arthur, he's earned the right to pull the legendary sword Caliburn from the stone. And as soon as he does, the thing opens its big googly anime eyes and starts just snarking on him.
Onward, my young knave.
Stop calling me Knave! I'm Sonic the Hedgehog!
Very well then, I shall call you Knave the Hedgehog.
Whatever, you oversized letter opener.
I love him already. One level in, the gameplay has been a mixed bag, but the story just keeps on subverting my expectations. I went into this thinking it'd be a bog-standard festival of fantasy tropes, but instead it's been genuinely funny so far. And like, Sonic stories have been funny plenty of times before, but this time it's not because we're getting mired in over-the-top melodramatic nonsense. This one's actually doing it on purpose. Now if I can get that gameplay to click. Camelot Castle definitely comes across as the first proper stage, though I gotta say it doesn't really amount to much more than dashing through city streets cutting down enemies. Secret Ring stages were a lot meatier than anything I've seen here so far. Sand Oasis started you out in gorgeous arid ruins and had you blast through a variety of unique locales and set pieces before you finally hit civilization. Camelot Castle is weirdly basic by comparison. You start in realistically dull hills, reach the castle town literally 10 seconds later, and the view never changes from there. The true aim of this stage and its missions seems to be to ease you into combat against actual enemies. So yeah, let's talk some more about that swordplay. How you swing the Wii Remote doesn't seem to have any actual bearing on how Sonic swings his sword. The motion control is more or less just replicating the action of a button press in a way that's intended to be more immersive, but may instead feel less precise, especially if you're not used to it. This sort of thing was actually extremely common on the Wii. The original model of the Wii Remote wasn't actually precise enough to capture real-time movement with much accuracy, so a great many Wii games treat a shake no differently than they would a button press. Even the Wii's marquee launch game wasn't actually doing anything with swordplay that couldn't be done with the B button in the GameCube version. Man, did Sonic Team love Twilight Princess in the late 2000s or what? Funny thing is, the game actually launched just a couple of months before the Wii Motion Plus was released. This was an add-on, which they eventually started building into the Wii Remote itself, which basically made the controller as accurate as it always should have been. If they'd had that from the start, Black Knight might have been a very different game. Cause as it is, keeping in mind that I'm someone who actually likes motion controls and thinks this and this and this is totally okay, I really wish I could just hit a button. In all those other examples, the action you take when you shake the remote is extremely clear and consistent. In Black Knight, the action Sonic takes seems to be dependent on how fast he's moving. A small sweeping move at lower speeds, or a big vertical spin strike when he's moving faster. He also always seems to do this if he's in the air. Just for starters, I do not know where the line is on what Sonic's gonna do, and each attack hits in different positions. But either way, you'll notice both of these actions involve Sonic, the fastest thing alive, leaving his feet, slowing down, and flinging himself into the air. So there's a distinct lack of flow to the gameplay thus far. It's a lot of start-stop. There's no lock-on to the basic combat either. It's all about positioning, at least for your first swing. But once you hit an enemy, I figured out what a combo strike entails. You basically just keep waggling the Wii Remote. And because sword strikes are so inconsistent, they lack weight and crunch. But here's the best option I found so far. Jump into the air, hit A again to home in on an enemy, and as Sonic dashes forward, that's when you swing the remote. I'm not exactly sure how to time it, and I feel like the imprecision of the Wii Remote might be partially to blame, but when it works, this pulls off a buzzsaw homing attack that cuts through multiple enemies and actually gains speed. It's a lot more fun than the other options, but I hope this isn't all I'm doing for the rest of the game. While the basic combat doesn't have a lock-on, the soul gauge does. Here's how it works. Yeah, it looks cool, but again, it's pretty dang basic. Although on my second run through these missions, I noticed that the homing reticle flashes, and you seem to hit harder and use up less of the gauge if you swing it then. That is probably the one part of the swordplay that actually is crunchy, at least so far. Combat works, it's not unplayable, but it's not strategic enough to be interesting, and it's not kinetic or spectacular enough to be fun. It's a delicate balance, but shaking a stick at the screen to boringly cut down hordes of enemies, instead of free running at the speed of sound through imaginative video game levels, really ain't doing much for me so far. So over on the non-gameplay side of things, again, Black Knight's faring a lot better. Remember how back in Secret Rings, Sonic absolutely could not get it through his head that even if someone looked like a person he knew, they were actually a part of the storybook? Well, look at what happens in Black Knight.
Hey, Tails! No, it can't be. This is the smithy, right?
It sure is.
Totally not Miles Tails per Hour here works as a blacksmith, and his shop comes complete with a really nice medieval rendition of his Sonic Adventure theme. I don't really understand what I can or even should be doing here yet. I keep finding all kinds of flowers and swords and chili dogs after every stage, but I have absolutely no idea what they do or how this works. Problems for future, Josh. But anyway, after one main story mission and 2 tutorial stages that introduce the soul gauge, it looks like it's already time to move on to the next location. So, Secret Rings was mostly a straight shot from level to level, but am I gonna be jumping around between different stages more in Black Knight? Yep, that's exactly how it works. First, you play through a new level, Deep Woods. Then, you beat up Shadow the Hedgehog in the feel-good moment of the year. Then, you reach the Lady of the Lake, and she gives you 3 chivalrous tasks to be completed in 3 days. Rescue the innocents from Arthur's dungeon, offer compassion to those in need, and defeat the Knights of the Underworld that Arthur leads. This unlocks 2 additional missions in Deep Woods, and 2 more back in Camelot Castle. Amy doesn't know how to count. So, Deep Woods. It starts out in a fairly realistic setting, but after a quick horsey ride into the woods, I think the stage did a better job at bringing in a few more fantastical elements. Giant trees, incandescent plants, overgrown wilds. It's pretty good. The stage hazards were a little more interesting too, with swinging spiked vines, bees to swipe away with a sword, and an absolutely insane amount of bear traps lining the path. That's when Sonic is ambushed by one of Arthur's knights, Sir Lancelot. He boldly dares Sonic to abandon his sword and run away, to which Sonic replies,
Sounds good to me!
Ooh. I don't like fantasy settings. I never did. I remember we rented The Lord of the Rings when I was a kid, and it literally bored me to sleep. The setting, the tropes, the unending epic seriousness of the whole premise, it just doesn't do anything for me. But the reason I'm enjoying this so much in spite of that is just how on point Sonic himself is. Everyone around him is playing it straight, going on about honor and valor and chivalry, and Sonic just flat out refuses to take any of it seriously. His character is the antithesis of everything around him. He mocks the premise with his mere presence. He doesn't have any more patience for this stuff than I do. This is especially true in the way he talks with Caliburn, who plays it more straight than anybody, and their dynamic is by far my favorite thing about the game so far.
He is Knave the Hedgehog, and he accepts your challenge.
Hey, wait just a second here!
Very well then. Brace yourself, Knave the Hedgehog.
So Sonic and Lancelot shall have an epic duel, replete with a brand new vocal theme. 'Tis an epic battle, as dusk falls in a verdant clearing. Who shall stand triumph? It's already over. It was over so fast they hadn't even gotten through their opening dialogue. Look at this.
Oh yeah? Well, I don't plan on losing. Got that?
No! Is far too careless.
Rescuing the innocents involves a mission back in Camelot Castle. And given how tepid I was on this stage the first time, I was pretty surprised when it started with a cinematic set piece and a change of scenery. Maybe these levels have a little more variety than I gave them credit for. And then you spend the whole mission in these catacombs fighting a chain of baddies and busting townsfolk out of jail. It's fine. Defeating underworld soldiers boils down to rampage missions, returning from Secret Rings. Like I thought, I'm relying a lot on that homing strike. I mean, you can carefully take down enemies and guard and time your attacks, or you can just fling yourself at them and let Sonic do the rest.
All this is too easy. Don't you have anything tougher? I'm falling asleep.
The last task is to offer compassion, and this leads to one of the strangest mechanics I've ever seen in a video game. I think most of you are probably familiar with QuickTime events, or QTEs, where you have to execute button combinations to make your character do something awesome. I don't mind these for the most part. I mean, I was there when they were born. QTEs are typically used to add cinematic flair to a game's cutscenes, or to let you pull off tricks in special locations within gameplay. But Black Knight is anything but a typical game. Instead of pulling off awesome tricks, you need to come to a complete stop, stand in front of one of these Yoda-looking dudes, and hit a QTE to give them rings. And they're in regular stages too, where they'll trade you items. I mean, I kind of love the audacity of performing a QTE to trade. It's such a ridiculously, obviously terrible idea that I'm almost impressed they actually did it. I think I would be if you didn't have to halt your forward momentum to do it. Man, Sonic Team is wild. With the 3 tasks behind them, Sonic and Caliburn head back to the Lady of the Lake to get their info when they happen across a young Yodalian girl who says a dragon attacked her village and took her parents. Caliburn insists that they're on a deadline, that they don't have time for diversions. But do you really think Sonic the Hedgehog is going to turn down someone who needs his help? Again, surprisingly top-tier character work here. Sonic might be a braggadocious, headstrong teenager with attitude who mocks the very premise of the game he's in, but his sense of justice in spite of that is what makes him a hero. He hates tears, he hates seeing anyone suffer, and while he may not be mature about it, he's more than willing to shrug off his duties to help someone in need. I'm gonna make a prediction here, though. That little girl is actually Amy in disguise. This whole thing's just another part of the test. I'm not gonna be smug if I'm right about that.
A great big dragon attacked my village!
Her voice just gives it away too much. Titanic Plain is far and away the best stage so far. Yes, we're still in a bog-standard real-world field, but at least the hills are green and the skies are blue. More importantly, this stage introduces new enemy types that drag the combat mechanics, kicking and screaming, into being a little more interesting. Enemies with spears that require you to think about your positioning, and giant armored knights that punish you for getting in too close. By experimenting with the latter, I discovered that if you time a block well, you can riposte. I have my doubts about how well it's going to work, but it is at least clear that there's more depth under the surface than it seems. That homing strike might actually not be my go-to move forever. The planes are also pretty good from a level design perspective. There's a notably increased variety to the layout. You slide down a steep ledge, scale a wall using the sword, and I especially love this part where precisely jumping through a stone ruin lets you combo through the whole section. Jump mechanics really are so much better than they were in Secret Rings. That weird charge thing that also functioned as a brake is gone, and rails actually work now. Titanic Plain was so fun, in fact, that I just sat there and replayed it 4 or 5 times, experimenting with all these new mechanics and repeatedly trying and failing to get a higher rank. This is the first stage where I've had any real urge to do that, but hey, that's a good sign. The Knuckles fight? Sorry, the Sir Gawain fight. Keeps up this trend. But first, huge credit to Dan Green for really going all in on this whole Knight of Arthurian legend thing.
You look just like this knucklehead I know.
Ho! You dare mock Sir Gawain, Knight of the Round Table? An act most unwise, my friend.
Taking Knuckles' core character trait of a duty-bound guardian and cranking it up like that is really funny, and it really fits. His design's awesome too, especially the fact that he gets an armor version of his Lego shoes. And yeah, the fight itself felt like an actual fight this time. I mean, I still can't say it was great or anything, but you know, I lost a few times. I actually had to try. Ah, Knuckles, you'll always be Sonic's best rival in my book. And you know what I said about Sonic being an absolutely disruptive force in this world of knights and chivalry? Because he refuses to go along with that nonsense? Well, after I had him whip Knuckles' spiny red butt, he did this.
To lose to a mere apprentice! I have been disgraced! Only death can remove this stain upon my honor!
Give me a break! What's up with all this drama?
That's what I'd been saying for years. Man, if we'd had this Sonic back in 06, maybe the plot actually would have been great. Seriously, I can't get enough of this guy.
Isn't there more to being a knight than just serving a king?
And, I guess that's it for now. Aside from a very brief tutorial stage that taught me something I had already figured out, we get no other missions here, so it's time to move on to the next level. Now, let's hope this was a sign of things to come. It's a tale as old as time. The more you play a Sonic game, the better it gets. And while some of that is definitely just me getting a little more used to the eccentricities of the control scheme, I think there's more to it than that. Like Secret Rings, Black Knight actually does make a worse first impression than it needs to by limiting you early on. Unlike Secret Rings, it doesn't actually make you keep track of your upgrades via a customization menu. Rather, I'm unlocking abilities automatically as I go, and they're getting added to my moveset. Sonic now is faster, stronger, and generally more capable than he was just a few levels ago. And wonder of wonders, that makes him more fun to play. But it really doesn't hurt that the levels keep getting better too. Crystal Cave is hardly the most imaginative level I've ever seen, a cave with bioluminescent plants, but it's still a nice change of pace. And look at this! It even features multiple paths, areas where you can skillfully stay on a high route, and honest-to-goodness environmental progression. Both Titanic Plains and Crystal Cave have kicked off with no-frills, go-for-the-goal missions, and these have both been noticeably more substantial than anything Black Knight had done to that point. I don't want to oversell it or anything, but it is comparatively a huge improvement. The game's getting better as it goes, and hopefully it keeps up that momentum. With the niceties out of the way though, the mission where you actually rescue the villagers has this part where you have to use the Wii Remote to reflect a sunbeam, and this functions so poorly that I actually remembered why motion controls fell out of favor. Hopefully we don't do anything else like this. With her parents and villagers saved, Sonic and Caliburn run into the little girl again and... Yeah! I'm a genius! Sure enough, Sonic has proven his faith in the heart of the cards or whatever, and earned the gift of knowledge. To create a weapon capable of defeating King Arthur, he must defeat the Knights of the Round, take their swords, and combine them with Caliburn. So it's awfully convenient that he's been doing that anyway. He's already got 2 out of the 3. I also got something called the Medal of Gawain, which changes the stage music to a 20-second loop of the opening verse of Knuckles' theme from Sonic Adventure, in case I wanted that. Speaking of theming via an incredibly tortured segue, I'll give Black Knight's aesthetic some credit here. Rather than using the standard models for springs, boost pads, trick ramps, and the like, Black Knight has an appropriately medieval rendition of each. Granted, about half of them are just differently colored fairies, but still, it's a Sonic game where even the rings aren't rings, and that's pretty cool. On the one hand, ain't nothing cool about this. As far as stage theming goes, this is more like it. But on the other hand, grind without hitting the ground, that sounds fun.
I guess I'll hold back for now. 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 I guess I'll hold back for now.
I guess I'll hold back for now. I take back everything I said earlier. Jason Griffith is bad, and he should feel bad.
I have to admit, though, I was more of a fan of Mario because I had a Nintendo growing up.
I'm kidding, Jason. We're cool now. Still, holy dooly. I spent so long on that I had to stop myself and look it up before it turned into another one of those interminable Johnny race situations. Sword strikes are particularly laggy while grinding, and as improved as the grinding controls are, it's still a challenge to maneuver with enough finesse to pull this off. You can't air boost while you're jumping off a rail, unless you get far enough past the rail that Sonic regains his normal controls. But I have no idea how I was supposed to know that, so even once I got good enough to reach the end every once in a while, I'd still just keep hitting the ground or running into the wall until I looked it up and realized, you jump at the last possible moment, wait until you're far enough past the rail, then you can air boost. Molten Mine is a tremendous difficulty spike, and it's not just because of that grind mission. Aesthetically and creatively, it's far and away the best stage so far, not even a contest. Instead of just being a generic lava level, it's a mining town that runs through the volcano, complete with Sonic nonchalantly trashing residents' houses as he blasts through them.
Not much foothold here. Better take it slow.
Yeah, that's the most out-of-character thing I've ever heard him say. More like, better back up onto solid ground and fly over the entire section. These sidestep areas weren't great in Secret Rings either, but they're even worse here. Just gotta stop to slice apart blocks and worry about molten rocks randomly falling on your head. And as creative as the level is, man, it's rough around the edges. The minecarts blend into the background and it's hard to see them coming. Then the level suddenly starts throwing minecarts full of molten rocks at you that you can't cut through. The camera angles don't always give you enough time to react to what's coming. The grind sections contain areas where you'll fall into lava if you don't pick the right path. And missing a jump can lead to getting very awkwardly stuck on geometry. This is just a lot more frustrating and a lot more reliant on trial and error than anything we've seen so far. So obviously I sat there and replayed the stage over and over and over and over for like half an hour trying to get better at it. I know who I am. Meanwhile, back at the plot, Sonic is gonna fight Percival. Look, any game that has Blaze in it automatically gets an extra point. That's just the rule. Character versus character battles have never, ever, ever been very good, and I don't think these are gonna break that trend. It's great that I've got to employ a little more strategy now than I did with Shadow, but still, there's just not much to them. Block attacks, counter-strike, getting close, and fail this weird little sword clash QTE every time because the Wii Remote isn't reactive enough.
State your name and your master, sir.
I'm Sonic. Sonic the Hedgehog. I have no master, except the wind that blows free.
I can't decide if that's incredibly badass or if it's the hokiest thing I've ever heard. He's so cool, but he's so lame. And that strange dichotomy is where the character finds his charm. After being defeated, you know how it goes. Blaze tries to walk off a cliff, Sonic saves her, and finally, after an entire game of calling him Knave,
Sonic the Hedgehog, you have mastered the code of chivalry. From this day forth, you shall be Sir Sonic, Knight of the Wind.
I don't even need to wrestle with that one. That is an unabashedly badass title. And with that, Merlina finally shows up again. I didn't think to mention it when it happened, but she'd split off way back at Camelot Castle because she didn't want Arthur's forces to recognize her. So with all 4 swords in hand, it's finally time to put an end to King Arthur's reign once and for all. But first, I should probably go back and hit up all those missions I've been unlocking, as well as give a late-game replay to all the main stages. I did this quite a few times throughout Secret Rings, but it didn't seem particularly notable, so I didn't mention it. Like, what am I gonna say? And then I replayed all the levels in a Sonic game. What a revelation! There's a reason I'm bringing it up now. I opened the map, went into Camelot Castle, and go for the goal. That's right. Camelot Castle and Deep Woods both have fully featured, perfectly substantial, comprehensive action stages with enemy variety and unique set pieces and interesting gimmicks and varied locations. Camelot Castle takes you from the fields into the castle town, up to the ramparts and onto the battlements, then back down into the dungeons. It's fantastic stuff. And Deep Woods has a marsh! They're just not part of the main campaign. They have no bearing on the story whatsoever. Instead, Black Knight gave me itty-bitty pieces of the full levels, which I in turn critiqued with the assumption that that's what they were. No, as a Sonic fanboy, I'm delighted. But as a gamer, I'm frustrated that the game I'm playing undermined itself by making such an unnecessarily bad first impression. And as the person writing the script, I'm annoyed that I'm gonna have to record and edit all of this criticism that, it turns out, doesn't matter as much as I thought it did. I think my assumption was fair. I figured Black Knight was weaving its narrative into its campaign more than Secret Rings did, giving each main stage a more direct role in the story. And therefore, these special missions about finding the blacksmith or reaching the Lady of the Lake, those were the main stages. That's why I started enjoying the game so much more when I got to Titanic Plains. I had to play through pieces of 4 different levels before it ever actually gave me the full-fledged version of any of them. To give them the benefit of the doubt, I'd say the intent was to avoid overwhelming the player too much. The game eases you into a wider pool of enemies, and putting the real versions of these stages up front would have been throwing you in the deep end. Gotta remember, 12 and under first and foremost, but I've still gotta count this as a major misstep. It's not the only time a Sonic game directed by Morio Kishimoto would get its main stages confused with its sub-stages. But as annoying as that is, I guess it does serve as a record of just how much Black Knight stumbles out of the gate, and why even a lot of people who do give it a chance walk away with a bad taste in their mouths. First impressions are important, and honestly, if I was just playing this game for its own sake, I might have stopped before I ever even made it to Titanic Plain. On that note, now I'm positive that none of those cataclysmically angry Sonic fans that were yelling at me on the internet played this back in 2009. If they had, they'd have at least found something to praise about it. It has sections where you play as Sonic as they claimed it always should have been. in 2 dimensions. Wow, these are terrible. It's like the game can't decide if pushing forward should move you this away or that away. But it was still loads better than this. A mission where you have to avoid running into any of the villagers. The villagers, as they do in every stage, fade into existence about 5 feet in front of you, while you're playing as a character who runs at the speed of sound.
I guess I'll hold back for now.
You know, I guess I will. Let's go kill King Arthur! No, really, there's never been any question. That is what we're doing. Atop the castle rampart, Sonic confronts his foe. The evening sun turns the Black Knight gold. A brand new Crush 40 song kicks up, epic as ever. This is the final battle. And while it's undermined a bit by the Wii Remote's usual shortcomings, all in all, it's pretty awesome. Like the fight at the start of the game, you've got to chase Arthur down and strike. But there's so much more to it this time. Arthur keeps you at bay with a variety of powers. Paralyzing beams, homing shots, and sword strikes powered by Umbran witchery. You need to send those homing shots back at him, and stay in close enough that you can get the edge when they slow him down. It took a while to get the timing right, but when I finally did, I only actually had to catch him once to take him down. I guess all that practice with the Soul Surge paid off. With that, Sonic can finally... well, I thought he was gonna fuse the swords together. Alright, I guess this works too. He depowers King Arthur and steeds himself to deliver the final blow. For the first time in my life, I actually dig this medieval setting. That 8-year-old version of me is internally jumping up and down, swinging a toy sword around, and it's just... credits. The credits are rolling. Uh-oh. That's, That's the most anticlimactic thing I've ever seen. Like, even Donkey Kong Land was more... I was literally just writing this section during the credits, and I looked up and saw that a new level had unlocked. So if that was a credits fake out, it got me, and it was about 1 billion times more effective here than it was in Secret Rings. Alright, onward then! We pick up right where we left off, with Sonic having just defeated King Arthur, when suddenly, the king fades to nothingness. Sonic finds Merlina, and, you know, this will probably be more effective if I just tell you what I said when I first watched it.
We have orders from the king. Have you any last words?
Your king was nothing more than an illusion my grandfather conjured up.
What?
Well done. And thank you, Sonic. With this scabbard, I can erase my grandfather's greatest mistake.
What?
I shall make this kingdom eternal.
What the fuck?
Sonic, get back!
Oh my god. I thought I was so clever predicting that the little girl was Amy, but no, I'm a fool! I never saw this coming, and oh my god, I love it! Sonic and the Knights of the Round storming through the castle, how the hell does a Wii game that I bought for $5 have one of the best stories in the whole goddamn series? I'm so hyped and I'm so mad that it took 13 years, but I'm so glad I'm finally playing this, okay? Breathe. After all that revelation, going back to merely playing Sonic and the Black Knight honestly feels like a step down. But alright, video games, I can do this. Knight's Passage is the level you play just after the big twist, as Sonic has a ridiculously long time to escape the castle before it crumbles around him. I think my mind was still reeling from the shock, trying to make sense of what I just learned, because I kinda played this level on autopilot. I will say though, it feels like a bit of a letdown that there's not more spectacle to it than this. You don't really feel the danger you're supposed to be in. No crumbling castle walls, towers exploding and slamming into each other. It's just a reuse of Camelot Castle, now with more enemies, a red sky, and a bunch of long, boring boat rides that really undermine the tension. The best thing about video game stories is how you can use the player's agency, the fact that they are an active participant in it, to help tell those stories. Knight's Passage isn't really bad, but it's not special, and after all of that, it really could have been. Gawain is desperate and ready to give up when Sonic approaches him.
What? Are you gonna give up just like that? Is that the best that chivalry of yours can do?
How dare you!
Listen, it's like I said before. Isn't there more to being a knight than serving a king?
Where earlier in the game Sonic's attitude was more impetuous, and his refusal to play by the rules of the world he found himself in was played for comedy, that same rejection of the premise now takes on a different meaning entirely. Sonic gives the knights their weapons back. The plan is for the 4 of them to use their sacred swords to form a barrier around the castle, containing Merlina's power and saving the kingdom. And then, 3 brand new stages have opened up. I can play them in any order I like, and I've gained the ability to play as Knuckles. And Blaze! And also Lancelot too, I guess. I am fully on board now, I can't wait! If I can be honest, when I play a Sonic game, I don't actually care about playing as anyone besides Sonic. I don't mean that to sound dismissive, I don't not care either. I was never one of those types who just wanted to cut off the extended cast entirely. It's fine if other characters are available, but it's equally fine if they're not. It's never going to be what makes or breaks a Sonic game for me. This is my favorite character. This is the type of gameplay that I can't get from any other series. And this is the reason I'm here. Anything else is just a bonus. So if we're gonna have more than just him, that's fine, but ideally, the same core gameplay of speedy action should still be present, with characters' unique abilities or perspectives giving that gameplay a different flavor. It's like having a pizza with different toppings. But Sonic Team in the early 3D days was sometimes, not always, but sometimes inclined to take a very different approach. Instead of stages built around speedy platforming action, they'd make you play a different genre entirely. This would be like going out for pizza, and the chef brings you one delicious slice, but then he tells you that you're gonna need to play laser tag, or get through an escape room, or go fishing before he'll bring you any more pizza. Oh, and also the rooms for all those activities got covered in broken glass after some idiot named Sammy broke everything back in 2004. We're still trying to pick up the pieces. Sorry! This is why people really turned on the whole idea of Sonic even having friends. The problem wasn't usually with the characters themselves. The problem was that it wasn't enjoyable or complementary to the design of a Sonic game to play as them, and the game started absolutely insisting that you had to play as them to get to more of the good stuff. Sonic games don't necessarily just need to be about Sonic, but even when they're not, they should be about his gameplay. I'm happy to report then that Sonic and the Black Knight gets it right. Well, I mean to a point. It definitely has its heart in the right place, but I think the fact that I went from being like, oh boy, new characters to play as, to let's analytically explain Sonic game design with a hackneyed food metaphor like I'm a bell pepper with googly eyes, indicates that they didn't quite stick the landing. Knuckles, Shadow, and Blaze, or to be more accurate, Gawain, Lancelot, and Percival, are definitely still pizzas. They play with the same core components as Sonic, but they have subtly different movement and combat styles, mid-air abilities, and soul gauge powers. Blaze, in a bizarre break from series tradition, actually seems to be the worst of the 3. Her attacks don't hit hard, and her specials frankly feel a little floaty and unfinished. She can run along walls though, stealing from SBO again I see. Shadow's more up to par with his ultimate badass animations and aggressive melee attacks. It's also fun that his armor comes with what I have to assume are steam-powered rocket shoes. I realize I haven't talked about the soul gauge in a long time, and that's because I've been waiting to see if there's going to be anything more to it. As an ability, it looks cool. Sonic homes in and strikes, Knuckles launches his swords as projectiles, Shadow inexplicably uses chaos powers. But if the soul gauge in the last game was awesome but impractical, this one is just the opposite. It's an extremely effective but extremely boring way to get the job done. Perfect strikes are done with identical cadence regardless of your foe. They're super easy to pull off, and they generate enough soul that you can just strike back and forth to wipe out an infinite cavalcade of enemies. Knuckles is definitely my favorite of the knights. He's slower than the others, but unlike the rest, using 2 blades as his first test. His running animation as he kicks into high gear is fantastic. He also comes with the most effective movement differences. Might be locked to a track, but I'm so happy to see actual gliding in a 3D game again. And of course, his climbing mimics the same ability from earlier games. He's pretty great. Or he would be. If he wasn't so completely incapable compared to the character that I've actually been playing as and leveling up for all these hours. Black Knight's swordplay never really clicks, but what's kept that from being too frustrating is this. As Sonic has gotten stronger, the combat, clunky and imprecise though it may be, has been easy enough to overlook. Instead of being a tedious, overly complicated waggle fest, it's just simple. You don't really have to think about it that much. It's unremarkable in gameplay terms, it's basic, but it's simple. But all the knights are pretty much as underpowered as Sonic himself was at the start of this game. And what's worse, none of them level up or gain new abilities through experience. Instead, all of those hundreds and hundreds of items I've been picking up finally have a purpose. The blacksmith can forge new weapons for them via a menu that tells you absolutely nothing about what you're even doing. What am I making? Which character can use it? What does it do? Give me something, Tails! Pfft. This whole system feels like one of those super ambitious ideas that they just didn't have time to finish. And maybe they didn't, considering that, oh yes, you can only play as the other characters in these 4 stages. So there's very little incentive to actually bother playing as anyone but Sonic. Especially because at the same time as you unlock the other characters, you also gain the ability to swap his gameplay style to match any of them. And unlike them, he gains new abilities through experience. He gets an awesome talking sword to snark back and forth with. Maybe I'd feel differently if I put another dozen hours into unlocking better gear for everybody. But still, 4 levels, why bother? That really is the biggest detriment. Considering the major benefit of the other characters play like Sonic model is that you can use them on the same stages. So yeah, whatever they were trying to do here, it didn't work. At least the levels themselves are good. They all follow the same sort of precedent that Knight's Passage set. Ultra-difficult timed missions through stages that aren't quite new, but are very effectively remixed. Familiar locales with new accoutrements, layouts, and gimmicks. I played through the Cauldron as Knuckles, had a fantastic time pretending I was back in Red Mountain, got to the end, and Blaze sheathed her sword into the volcano monument. Funnily enough, who you actually play as through these has no bearing whatsoever on the plot. Yeah, this whole post-credits game is showing noticeably more roughness around those already rough edges, but let's see if Black Knight can still stick the landing. Okay, so in all the shock and awe earlier, I didn't really properly examine this plot point. King Arthur, the titular Black Knight, never actually existed at all in this world. He was a creation of Merlin, meant to be a figure who would ensure peace and longevity. But once Merlin was gone, his creation was corrupted. And Merlina, having spent her life seeing this precarious balance fall to pieces, wants to use the power of the scabbard to create a kingdom that never ends. To create, in fact, a story that never ends. Because here's another twist, coming in the 11th hour. Merlina knows she's a work of fiction, and she knows how that story ends.
Lancelot and Gawain's rift shall doom the Round Table. Arthur is struck down by his son Mordred and departs for Avalon. This was to be our ideal world, but it will not last.
Merlina's entire conflict from the very beginning was that she knew this world was finite, but she wanted to change that. She wanted her kingdom, her story, to last forever. And Sonic, rather than being sympathetic, seems offended by the very notion.
What good is a world that goes on forever?
Then Merlina, like a razor Jin before her, transforms into an eldritch abomination and starts just tearing Sonic to shreds like she's a mid-2000s video game reviewer. I'll give it this. The imagery of Caliburn, whom I'm now convinced is the best character in the entire series, getting snapped in two is strong and vivid, as is the scene of Sonic getting knocked down again and again, but refusing to give in, standing his ground. Sonic gets back up one more time, and for the first time I can ever remember, this awesome rendition of his theme song from Sonic Adventure kicks in, and what's left of Caliburn takes on a golden aura. The other knights finally combine their swords with his. We were talking about doing that earlier, it's about time. And then, yeah, okay, this is freaking cool. This is the most tokusatsu transformation scene I've ever seen out of the series, and I really love it. The actual fight's pretty good too, or it was once I figured out what I needed to do anyway. Until then, it was kind of annoying how I kept getting knocked way the heck back, and having to watch as Sonic slowly moved back into position. But nah, you just knock her attacks back, time a strike to make an opening, then get in there with a Soul Surge. The faster you swing the Wii Remote, the faster Sonic strikes, and that feels awesome. That's how the Eraser Gen fight should have worked the whole time. But let's be real, my main issue this time isn't the gameplay, it's, surprisingly, the story. What makes Sonic's snarky attitude such a powerful character trait is that when he's pushed to his limit, switches gears, and finally gets serious, that can be incredibly effective. It's just that when he's standing his ground for puts a really bad taste in my mouth. It's really kind of taken me out of the part of the game that I was enjoying the most, and that was the part of a Sonic game that I never enjoy the most.
Merlina. Every world has its end. I know that's kind of sad, but that's why we gotta live life to the fullest in the time we have. At least, that's what I figure.
Jason Griffith really had gotten that voice down to a T, hadn't he? He delivers that line with so much sincerity and compassion, and yet he still sounds like a teenager with attitude. Good on you, man. So okay, I'll say this as kindly as I can. The central conflict between them isn't framed as Merlina subjugating the people of the kingdom, imposing her will on them, or anything so wicked. Rather, it's that she's aware of the fact that she's a character in a story, and she doesn't want that story to end. And that's an interesting twist. But what I don't like is that Sonic has to stop her, because that doesn't suit his tastes, I guess. The Sonic series has never, ever been shy about the fact that it treats the fourth wall as a mere suggestion. But this has got to be the most meta story beat they've ever had, and that's what took me out of it more than anything. That with this revelation, Sonic himself is framed as the only thing in this world that's real. Sonic, who we know as a fictional character, has been brought into a world that he sees as fiction, encountered a character within it who knows she's fictional, and essentially wants to change her fate, and he thinks all of that, and I'm quoting him here, sounds pretty lame.
What good is a world that goes on forever? That sounds pretty lame.
I mean, I think the idea of a Sonic that goes on about how the world ending is good actually sounds pretty lame. Although, considering what he tells Merlina here, is that even what he's saying?
This story and the world it created will come to an end. Is that what you wish?
Nah, it's not gonna end. My stories only end when I stop running.
Like, I think that sounds pretty in character. So, I don't even know what the conflict is exactly. It's like the game really wants to make a big statement about mortality, or living life to the fullest, or something. But, how many times have I said this about a Sonic game story? It just doesn't work in execution. I'm thinking about this too hard, I know. I wouldn't usually overthink a Sonic story to this degree, because in my opinion, Sonic's in-game storytelling has never really reached much beyond, this is fine. I enjoy the characters and find them really charming, but I always view the stories they're put through from the perspective of like, man, I'd be so into this if I was still 10 years old. The idea that I might actually get invested in what's happening without that lens, I was never really expecting that. But it actually happened with Black Knight. It resonated with me and hooked me on a more sophisticated level, and so I'm more inclined to critique it as such. I loved this story right up to the end, but it lost me when Sonic stopped feeling like Sonic. If I was writing this just a few years ago, that's all I would have had to say. But I'm too aware of my own biases now. I can go on all I want about seeing this story from a more adult perspective, but the truth is, the ideal of Sonic's character that lives in my heart was forged by things I experienced decades ago. My Sonic was irreverent and individualistic, but he was always heroic. My Sonic wouldn't have wished for hankies, told a princess to just smile, or waxed philosophical about living life to the fullest in the time we have. Because for my Sonic, nothing could survive the will to stay alive. But this was never really supposed to be my Sonic, was it? That Sonic didn't suit Shiro Maekawa's tastes, and so, with intent, he set out to turn Sonic into something else, to turn him into something that he would like. And while there was a time when I kinda found that idea insulting, and saw it as a decision that undermined what Sonic was quote-unquote supposed to be, what was Sonic ever really supposed to be? Sonic from the very beginning was a character and a world created to be open to interpretation, to thrive in different markets, in different mediums, and in different eras. Shiro Maekawa wasn't the first person to reimagine Sonic in a new light, to try and reform it into being something that suited his tastes, and he wouldn't be the last. Naoto Oshima, Hirokazu Yasuhara, Ben Hurst, Kenji Torada, Shiro Maekawa, Ken Pontac, Warren Graff, Eitaro Toyota, Makoto Goya, Jeff Fowler, Ian Flynn, they, along with so many others, all got to stake their claim on Sonic's legacy. Of course, different Sonics appeal to different tastes, which has also led to the permanently broken base that is the Sonic fandom. The first time I ever encountered the online community, they were locked in a flame war about whether this or this was more valid as the real Sonic. But Maekawa's attitude was the right one to have. It's inevitable that a long-running series won't stay the same forever. And sometimes, having someone who's not a fan come on board and take it in a wildly different direction is exactly what it needs to build a stronger legacy. And hey, this post-credit scene where Sonic hangs a lampshade on just how unbelievable this whole thing was, that was freaking hilarious.
That's the lamest excuse ever! You just forgot about our date!
No, it's true, I tell ya! Yikes! No! Amy, wait! Put down that hammer!
So maybe the whole thing was fiction, eh? Although, neither my or anybody else's Sonic should ever agree to go on a date with Amy. Sonic, have you been taking dating advice from this weirdo? She's 12 years old, man! What are you doing? You know, in spite of all the problems I have with it, I find myself walking away from Sonic and the Black Knight with a lot of affection for it. It features one of the most resonant portrayals of Sonic the Hedgehog any of the games. Heck, any form of Sonic media has ever had. I can even appreciate that ending from a certain perspective. Stories don't just have to make sense within themselves, they can also resonate with us in the real world. And if I take it in a sort of meta-narrative sense, I think it works nicely as Shiro Maekawa sort of waving goodbye, letting go of his time with Sonic through the subtext. It winds up being a game that's quite a bit stronger than the sum of its parts. So like I said, I found a lot of affection for it, just like the first person I ever saw say a good word about it. Back when Black Knight and other titles released around this same time were new, fans who had been burned a lot often spoke of these titles as soulless corporate betrayals, forgetting everything that made Sonic good in the first place, abandoning and undermining the potential of the series, even while fans like Taxman, Stealth, and the Megamix team, Sinosu, Colin C10, Marky Jester, and countless others proved over and over just how great Sonic could be, and just how badly Sega was missing the mark. But those games resonated with kids anyway. And the fact that those kids are here now, as fanatical about Sonic as anyone ever was, they're living proof that despite how many times I heard it back then, Sonic wasn't dead. Sonic still mattered. And after everything I've seen, heard, read, and been through, I'm thankful you all got to grow up as Sonic fans. And I'm glad you're here now, shining a light on why you love the things you love, and giving the rest of us the opportunity to see them through your eyes. It makes me wish I could have been as open-minded as you were back then. The wonderful thing about fandom is how, through the perspective of other people who feel the same way you do, you can discover a deeper level of appreciation for the things that bring you joy. The not-so-wonderful thing about fandom is that it can also do just the opposite. It can make you notice, worry about, and think about things that probably never would have occurred to you on your own. Fandom magnifies your view of whatever you see through it. And when I look back, I can't help but wonder if that's done me more harm than good. I don't think I'd have ever loved Sonic Heroes as a 15-year-old, but I definitely wouldn't have taken it so personally if I hadn't surrounded myself with an echo chamber of people who were just as disappointed as I was, feeding on all that negativity, all of us giving each other more and more reasons to be angry, pointing out things about it that never would have occurred to me on my own, and framing it as a game that spelled doom for everything we all loved about Sonic, instead of just, taking it as a game that I didn't like as much as I thought I would. I wouldn't have loved Sonic Heroes on my own, but I never could have hated it either. How many times have I been there? How many times have I been affected by that? If I didn't have the internet to influence me, maybe I wouldn't have completely forgotten that I actually thought Shadow was just this awesome new character with a fascinating backstory once upon a time. He was a character I liked so much that I named my PSO avatar after him, and used a macro every time I went through a telepipe. And without the internet, maybe I would have played Sonic and the Black Knight 13 years ago. The truth is, one reason that being a Sonic fan in the late 2000s was so frustrating, and the whole Sonic cycle meme was such bullshit, was that by the time it even started, the series had long since redeemed itself. At least it had to me. It had redeemed itself all the way back when I played Sonic Rush, and it continued to build on that success ever since. Had I played it back then, I imagine that Black Knight itself would have been yet more evidence of that, and I wish I had. Sonic Team was no longer the burnt-out husk that one renegade Sega employee had described them as a few years earlier. As soon as Yuji Naka was gone and 06 got kicked out the door, Sonic Team was reintegrated in Japan and filled out with younger, invigorated developers, some of whom had grown up as Sonic fans themselves. And though they were rough around the edges, I saw a spark in their games that I hadn't seen in ages. This wasn't Sonic Team being forced to churn out yearly Sonic releases and not being allowed to do anything else. This was a team that got to make the games they wanted to make. And I think a lot of fans knew that. We knew things were getting better, but convincing anyone else of that was like pulling teeth. Sonic's reputation preceded him, and nobody trusted him to be able to pull off swordplay or genre shift into a beat-em-up. But if you could see through to the core of the series, things were getting so much better. Sonic was making a comeback. Sega was lighting the fires of a renaissance. If only you could see the forest for the trees. But, understandably so, all anyone could see was a stretchy-armed werewolf, a hedgehog with a sword, and the absolute disaster that held so strongly in public consciousness. And so, at least in the eyes of general audiences, the Sonic cycle remained unbroken. But after Black Knight, Morio Kishimoto and his storybook team were promoted to the main series, and their next project would be the one to finally break that cycle. But that'll be a story to tell in my next Sonic season. Happy holidays, Happy New Year, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in 2023. Till then, you keep geeking, I'll keep critiquing.